talk about Quebec and referendums, there's often sort of an idea that only one side thinks there's a problem here. And what we're going to do in this video is to talk about the fact that, actually, most everyone involved in this situation agrees that there is a problem, that something is wrong with the relationship in Quebec. Where we get tension in this sort of relationship is that different parties have different ideas about what the problem actually is. So, for example, if we look at Pierre Trudeau's perspective, and this is going to be unsurprising if you think back to what he did in terms of the Canadian Constitution in '82, but from Trudeau's perspective, Quebec's problem is that they think they have a special status, and trying to create a confederation where some people have different statuses than others is what the problem is. And you fix that problem by creating a stronger centralized government and standardizing the powers and what is accessible to all of the other to all of the provinces, so that all of the provinces expect the same thing, all of the provinces can do the same thing, all of the provinces sort of stand on equal footing. So Trudeau's perspective, for example, is that that's the issue, that Quebec is trying to be unequal in that sort of case. As you might guess, the sovereigntists in Quebec think pretty much exactly the opposite. From their perspective, yeah, there's a problem, but the problem is that Quebec needs more independence, Quebec needs more ability to decide its own fate, and it needs to be less constrained by the federal government. And you get some sort of tensions around that. But we also have a lot of tensions in this sort of discussion around other sort of definitional issues, right? So when we talk about the idea of Quebec separating from Canada, it's often a surprise to my students that there isn't a really clear sort of definition as to what that means. We're going to talk through in this unit 2 different referendums, and they actually have very different ideas about what Quebec's separation from Canada would actually mean. What would that actually look like? So when we talk about independence, we can talk about the conversation about oh no, we are a fully independent country and we issue our own passports and there's a militarized border and you have to get a visa to go from one for the other. And then there's sort of like a Commonwealth version kind of thing, where you might talk about almost something like you see in the EU, actually, where yes, each of those countries is independent, but there's harmonized trade policy because all of the sort of countries get together and go, okay, well, this is what's coming into the European area, and they share currency, and there's all kinds of sort of overlaps there. And when we talk about sort of Quebec separating from Canada, it's really important to understand that different people mean different things when they talk about that. In that some people who say they want Quebec to be independent is really going for that sort of hard line, fixed border, nothing crosses without our permission version. And other people are looking at the yeah, I don't mind a lot of association with Canada. It's just that I really want to have control over, for example, these 3 small areas, and I don't want to, for example, be bound by the charter to protect the rights of English speakers in the country. So that's kind of a question to sort of talk about in that vein in terms of what does it mean for independence. We also have all kinds of questions about what it looks like when we start working through the sort of logistics of separatism and the independence of Quebec, if that's where we're going, in terms of, hey, what does that mean for the Maritimes? And what happens to things like federal infrastructure, i.e. train tracks that run through the province of Quebec, but back into Canadian territory on the other side? How do we sort of talk about those, especially because those kind of pieces are necessary in both ways? And another sort of key question that you'll see different positions on, and once you sort of recognize there are different positions, a lot of the other stuff going on makes a little bit more sense, is a sort of idea about whether or not you can trust the federal government, right? There's a significant proportion of the population in Quebec who doesn't think that the federal government keeps its promises. And we've talked about a number of reasons as to why that is the case. But that changes your perspective as to what you want that process to look like. Whether you want, for example, what kind of guarantees. And it also changes sort of your perspective on all kinds of things, right? Like, one of the things about most or many sort of independence movements around the world, certainly if we look at our closest neighbor in the United States, When we start talking about many independence movements, you're talking about things that are executed militarily. You're talking about martial sort of exercises. You're talking about armies facing each other. And that is sort of connected here in that if you don't trust that the other party is willing to negotiate your independence and is willing to do so in terms that they're going to respect and understand, then why would you do it? Right? If you don't think that the other party is going to actually respect those negotiations, why would you bother? It's a waste of time. So those are some like idea pieces that sort of come into this. And it's one of the reasons why we can't jump right into the Quebec referendums and have to do a whole bunch of context first, because history informs a lot of those ideas. So that's our sort of rough question about federalism and sovereignty and all those other pieces. And now we get into sort of, I guess, the nitty-gritty details of Quebec's referendums.